Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Profiles in Canada, Scouts Canada's web series, where we connect with Canadians who use their talents to the fullest for the common good. I'm Kaelem, and today we are joined by a special guest. It is Ambassador Kerry Buck, who between 2015 and 2019 was Canada's ambassador to NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And before that, Ambassador Buck has had quite a bit of time spent on human rights advocacy. She's held roles ranging in responsibility from Latin America and the Caribbean to Afghanistan to Africa, and Ambassador Buck is now a senior fellow at the University of Ottawa's Graduate School of Public and International Affairs, which is very close to the 63rd Ottawa and Voyageur Council. So, Ambassador Kerry, thank you very much for making the time. It's so good to have you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
So why don't we start with a good foundation? I wonder if you might discuss NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and why it's so important for Canada's, foreign policy.
NATO's pretty special to us, Canada, because right after the Second World War, we were one of the first countries to think that NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was a good idea.
Hmm.
We had a few things, Canada had a few things that it wanted to accomplish. It wanted to make sure that after the Second World War, that the US, the United States, stayed engaged in the world and didn't revert back behind its borders in North America.
Hmm.
They wanted to ensure that there was peace in Europe, not just because, we share some historical ties with Europe for sure, but peace in Europe is really important for Canada. So we wanted to achieve that. Then the last thing is during the Second World War, Canada came into its own.
Hmm.
We really did show ourselves as an independent sovereign nation, farther away from the UK. We distinguished ourselves. We weren't under the shadow of the US when we were fighting in Europe, not at all. So, one of the things that Lester Pearson, who was the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs when they started negotiating the treaty for NATO, said, and then later foreign minister, and then later prime minister.
Nobel
One of the
laureate.
things, yeah, Nobel, actually, okay, a little piece of history. So, what I have here, this is super
Okay.
cool. This is the box that Lester Pearson received his Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo.
Incredible.
Yeah, super incredible. Now, the
Whoa.
Peace Prize itself is at the Museum of History. I think that it's being exhibited there. It's held there, but
Wow.
here's the box that he himself received.
For
Super
our
cool,
viewers at
huh?
home, I did not know that Ambassador Buck had this box. This is this
Yeah,
is brilliant.
kind of
Okay.
really cool, really cool. We also have his service medals. He's the only prime minister who saw active duty
Hmm.
fighting in World War II.
Wow.
So anyway, just a cool aside. So what
Very
did
cool.
Lester Pearson say about NATO? He said it about Canada. He said it's time for Canada to have its own place on the world stage.
Hmm.
So he was actually one of the first people who came up with the idea of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
Wow.
What he saw was a place where key allies could get together, not just to have a what's called a mutual defense pact. I call it the Three Musketeers.
Hmm.
If I'm attacked, I'll come to your defense. If I'm attacked, you'll come to my defense. If you're attacked, I'll come to your defense. So that's the core, is kind of military, defense related. But Lester Pearson saw something bigger. It was a place where foreign policy could be made the primary security table in the world. And I think
Wow.
it's still the case, right?
Yeah.
So that's why, I think that those reasons are still the same for Canada. We still want to keep the US engaged in the world. It's in our interest, it's in their interest, I'd argue. We still want to keep Europe peaceable. That's harder to do now with a hot war in Ukraine with the Russian aggression. And we still want Canada to have that, place in global community where we can shape the world that we think is good for Canada.
Something that I wanted to touch upon was your work in advancing human rights.
Mm.
That has been a fundamental part of Canada's foreign policy agenda since Mr. Pearson, of course. Why was that so important for the work that you did? And actually, I remember that this work on human rights is what brought you into diplomacy in the first place. So maybe if
Yeah,
you might provide some
yeah.
comment on that.
Um, so When I was in, I guess I'll go way back when, this is last millennium, but when I was in middle school, I started reading books about the Second World War. And like a lot of kids, started with the Diary of Anne Frank and then kept on reading books about the atrocities of the Second World War, about the Holocaust. Fantastic novelist Prima Levi, who was
Mm,
poet too, who was imprisoned, and other really good writers. And it just opened up kind of a fire for me. It was hard for me to see when I was, in junior high and high school, what, you're a small person, right? What can you do to make a difference? Well, what I've seen is that you can make a difference. It'll be small, and that's okay. But many small differences add up to big differences. So think big, and if you get inspired by something like that, and you want to make the world a better place, you can certainly try and do it. And there's scope, I guess. There's room to change things. I like to think. So that was way, way back when. And then through a whole bunch of twists and turns, I ended up in the Canadian Foreign Ministry as a diplomat. And one of the first things I started working on was violence against women.
mm,
And the idea is that sometimes women are targeted for violence because they're women.
wow.
We've seen that in wars. For thousands of years, we've seen it in wars. But you see it on the streets too. That story that women tell, where when they walk down the street, quite often they'll keep their keys between, I do it, between their hands, just in case somebody comes up to attack them. It's just kind of a natural thing. It's not natural, but it's a thing we do as a matter of course. So violence against women because they're women happens at all levels of society. It happens inside Canada, inside every country in the world, and it happens internationally in wars too. So that was one of the first things I started working on. And that was 30 years ago. And since that time, we, Canada, managed to lead with a bunch of other countries to develop new rules, new
Mm,
international rules that require states to explain what they're doing to stop violence against women, to prevent it. For instance, simple things like training police officers, training judges to understand not to hurt victims when things go to the courts, training prison guards, training soldiers so that they don't engage in violence against women when they're engaging in conflict, that kind of thing. So, over those years, a whole bunch of rules have been made internationally. They're not always respected. That's always the case with the law. But a huge number of states have also signed on to those rules internationally. So, for me, that's important. That's one example. You can make a difference.
You mentioned Canada's leadership in bringing those countries together to set down these rules. I wonder why, if you might provide some commentary on why it's important that Canada in particular is a leader in the world in the human rights space.
Well, I use the word leader kind of carefully,
Okay.
especially internationally. You can't lead unless others are following you.
Okay.
Yeah, and then um, sometimes you have to do, whether this is like in international diplomacy or in work or wherever. Sometimes you have to do what I call lead from beside.
Hmm.
Diplomacy is letting other people have your way. An idea will take hold a lot more if somebody else thinks it's their idea, right?
Ah,
So that's part of the skill, I guess, or the art of diplomacy, creating a common goal. And so that, on my example earlier, violence against women, that's what we did. But
hmm.
Canada has something really special when it does that kind of leadership. Um, we know how to bring different cultures together and to find common ground. We do it at home all the time. We are either the most multicultural country in the world, or we've fallen slightly behind New Zealand, but we're up there.
Mm.
So we know how to talk across cultures to create that common ground, those common goals. And so, in my example of violence against women, the first group of what we call co-sponsors, so states that are ready to sign on to support this new rule to stop violence against women. We did it on purpose, but it came from around the globe. So early co-sponsors were Philippines from Asia. In Africa, we had, I believe it was Malawi and then South Africa, but memory may have the wrong state or the wrong timeline, Barbados, etc. It was really important that we create those groups that span the globe, span the different regions to start to build support. Well, Canada's really good at that kind of thing.
That's fantastic. I actually sort of want to touch upon that. You mentioned that Canada is among the most multicultural societies in our world. We were officially multicultural in 1971, I believe it was. What value does that give us on the world stage? Does that give us any street cred? Does that help us out when we try and use our soft power, I suppose, our diplomacy, our convincing, not attacking?
It really helps us out. It confuses some countries sometimes.
Okay.
I remember at the World Conference on Women in Beijing, China, our delegation showed up and we were the usual Canadian diplomatic delegation, right? So we came from everywhere. And that was easy to see. And many, many states, they have a history and a culture that's much more closed.
Hmm.
And they didn't quite know what to make of us, right? Um, but that's a superpower, a quiet superpower for Canada. So, if, for instance, the Asian group as a negotiating bloc was having difficulty with part of our the things we were trying to push at the World Conference, who would we send in to negotiate? Somebody who had some of that recent immigrant, but it was Canadian diplomat who had those cultural affinities and ties and could talk the language to the Asian group, but at the same time was firmly representing Canadian policy positions. But it's not just like us being, sneaky. As you talk to people from other countries, you also change your position. You open your mind. You don't change your position completely, but you understand the other guy's point of view. You understand their life experience. And so it really helps you find that common ground. So you're not like a bulldozer coming in saying my way or the highway.
Hmm.
You come in with your eyes open, your mind open, you listen, and then the end product probably doesn't look exactly like your first negotiating position, but it's going to be a heck of a lot better and it's going to have a lot more weight internationally if you have countries from every region of the world supporting it.
Feels like finding the middle ground is a very Canadian thing.
Yeah, and I think that's an okay thing, particularly in the world today where we're seeing more and more extreme positions being taken inside our own country,
Hmm.
across countries. Finding the middle ground's pretty important. It's a safe way, it's a good way, and it's kind of Canadian.
So when you were growing up, Kerry, did you ever imagine that you would be the NATO ambassador or that you would be able to have accomplished so much on the human rights front as you were able to?
No, never in a million years. I grew up in Sudbury, Ontario, which is a
Shout out
northern
Sudbury.
mining
Yeah.
town. Yeah.
Northern Ontario
And
Council for Scouts.
yeah. And mom and dad were high school teachers, and we didn't travel much. When I was a kid, we would go out to family cottage every summer, all summer. And that was that. So who would have imagined that, I could have traveled abroad, lived abroad, and been able to represent Canada, which is like, honestly, that was the coolest thrill of my whole career. Sitting behind the Canada sign at the United Nations
Wow.
or at the North Atlantic Treaty Organization later in my career is just a huge thrill. So I never would have imagined it. But, we do, most of us, except the First Nations, we
Hmm.
do come from somewhere else originally sometime.
Mm.
So even when I was a little tiny kid, my grandfather, my dad's father, had spent his youth working in mines in
Mm.
Peru and Chile and all through the
Wow.
region there. So I grew up with this idea, these stories from my grandpa that, yeah, you can go somewhere else. He himself was an immigrant, right? So that kind of, created the spark or the idea that you can do something outside of Canada. So that spark kind of stayed with me. And then when the opportunities presented itself to write the Foreign Service exam, I thought, well, okay, let's try this out for fun. And it was fun. As much fun as one can have at work, which one you can have fun at work. I had fun.
That's amazing. I want to ask about that. You mentioned that your career in the Foreign Service had many twists and turns, and I wonder if you ever encountered setbacks, and if that's true, how did you get over them? How did you accomplish going past them?
Um, there are always going to be setbacks, but sometimes those setbacks aren't really setbacks. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I go back to my story about negotiating. You start off with an idea of what's supposed to happen, and then you listen to others. You think, oh, I need to shift a bit. I need to learn. So if you take what might look like a setback at first as a learning opportunity, you will surprise yourself.
Mm.
And the other, I guess, lesson I learned is that if you keep your curiosity when you're working, you can do what I call leading from beside. Look around you when you're at work or when you're in your scout troop or when you're at school. What's a gap? What's a
Mm.
gap that needs filling that would make whatever it is you're doing a little bit better? Fill that gap, volunteer, bring your friends along with you and say, okay, well, I don't know what the example is. A rule on violence against women will be 500 times better if we can manage to bring 5 countries from Asia along in our co-sponsorship list.
Mm.
Fan out and do it. That's my, example. You'll have one from school. What's that gap that you can fill? And don't be afraid of volunteer work. It really, really does kind of help you learn, help you grow, and help you at work too, and at school.
You mentioned not to be afraid of volunteer work. I assure you that seems to be Scout's zeitgeist is volunteering.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
will ask one last question. Kerry, you already mentioned you've provided so much advice, obviously, for young people in Canada today. And so my last question would be, what advice would you have for young volunteers? What advice would you have for people who are maybe looking to make their first steps and really give back to their
yeah,
communities and make a positive difference?
yeah. Well, you can. Small steps are fine. Small steps are necessary. So don't be kind of intimidated or turned away because you can't do something huge. Um, point one. Point two, today the world is looking a little scary. It's even
Mm.
looking a little scary to me.
Mm.
Um, but take a bigger view. And if you look at what's happened over the last, I don't know, let's say 30 years, the world is in a much better place than it used to be.
Mm.
There are fewer kids living in poverty in Canada and internationally. There are fewer women dying in childbirth. The longevity, the lifespan of people has improved exponentially. Level of education around the globe has improved. Things are actually looking up. So I go back to the small steps. Make small steps in your community, and that adds up. It adds up to making the world a better place. Don't be frightened if the world seems like it's descending into a bit of chaos. It certainly looks more chaotic, but from that kind of chaos, you actually can make some progress. History's showing that. So don't give up.
Ambassador, thank you so much for being here with us today, for sharing your wisdom, for sharing your experiences. Um, your story, obviously, hopefully, will inspire the next generation of volunteers and the volunteers that we currently have here in Scouts. So, thank you for that.
Thanks so
And
much.
And to everybody at home, thank you for joining us with Ambassador Kerry Buck. Our next interview, our next Profiles in Canada episode is going to be next week, and it's going to be with another Canadian who uses their talents to the fullest for their country and for the common good. So I look forward to seeing you then. And thank you so much, Ambassador. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Cheers.
Bye bye.